Tonight, the story begins not with thunder, but with silence, the kind that creeps into temples when prayers go unanswered. In a city of marble, where gods were carved taller than kings, there lived a girl whose face made statues seem lifeless. Her name was Psyche. She was no goddess, no priestess chosen by prophecy, just a mortal girl born to a mortal king. Yet when she walked, the air trembled as if Olympus itself had leaned in to watch. People filled the streets not to praise their rulers, not even to sacrifice to Aphrodite, but to see her. They whispered her name in markets and painted her likeness on walls, though she had never asked for such attention. And slowly, the songs once sung for the goddess of love fell silent, replaced by the echo of one mortal's beauty. Imagine festivals once roaring with music, now muted. Altars once heavy with incense and roses, left bare. Priests raised their hands to call upon Aphrodite, only to find their followers distracted by the sight of Psyche walking through the square. Mothers carried their daughters to see her, hoping a glance might bless them with even a shadow of her grace. Men swore oaths at her feet. Kings sent messengers offering crowns, and still she only lowered her eyes and passed quietly, as if none of it belonged to her. The marble city loved her too loudly, and love too loud often turns into something dangerous. It began as adoration, but adoration curdled into worship, and worship unbalanced is always noticed. The gods, who accept praise like wine poured into an endless cup, do not forgive when mortals turn that cup aside. Aphrodite, whose temples once shook with laughter and song, now found them empty. The garlands of roses wilted on her statues, forgotten. Every time her priests prayed, the answers came back hollow. And, above it all, Psyche continued to live as if untouched by the storm she could not see gathering. Some called her a blessing, some called her a curse. Old women muttered in the streets that beauty, this perfect, was not a gift, but a trap, a flame so bright it would draw shadows from beyond the sky. Even her family felt the weight of it. Her sisters, fair in their own right, found themselves ignored, their names forgotten in the echo of Psyche's. Her father, once respected for his throne, found his power dwindling because people no longer looked to kings for guidance, only to Psyche's face. The city itself seemed to bend around her, not in celebration but in tension, as if waiting for something to break. And something did. For every story begins with a moment when the balance tips, when silence gives way to a whisper that grows louder until it changes everything. The whisper began in the highest halls of Olympus, where gods watched the mortal girl who had stolen Aphrodite's glory. They spoke not in praise, but in warning. One by one, their voices rose like distant thunder, and though Psyche could not hear them yet, the marble city was already trembling, because no mortal draws the eyes of the gods without paying a price. The king could no longer ignore the silence that clung to his palace. Priests who once promised blessings now offered only apologies. Sacrifices burned without smoke, and dreams in the city grew restless and cold. Everywhere people whispered the same fear, that Psyche's beauty had angered the gods. Crowds still adored her, but their adoration had shifted into unease. They bowed not with joy but with trembling hands, as if her presence itself carried a curse they could not name. Her father and mother tried to protect her, insisting she was only their daughter, not a rival to Olympus, but even they felt the weight pressing against the marble walls. Desperation led them to Delphi, where Apollo's oracle still lingered in a chamber of smoke and whispers. It was a journey lined with dread. The king's caravan moved slowly, each wheel groaning as though unwilling to carry them closer to truth. The priests walked barefoot, their heads bowed, carrying offerings of oil and gold. The queen sat beside her husband, her eyes hollow, her lips moving silently in prayer to a goddess who would not answer. And Psyche, though not permitted to speak during the pilgrimage, felt every step like a chain tightening around her chest. She had not chosen the worship that followed her, yet now she bore its punishment. The temple of Delphi was not what it once had been. Columns stood cracked, ivy curling along the stones, as if nature itself wished to hide the place from sight. The air smelled of ashes and strange herbs, and inside the cave, where the oracle dwelled, there was no sound of water or birds, only silence, deep and suffocating. They entered by torchlight, the flames bending against a wind that did not exist. At the far end, seated upon a throne of stone, was the oracle, draped in robes that shimmered faintly like smoke. Her eyes were blind but burning, and when she opened her mouth, the chamber filled with a hiss that was not breath but prophecy. You ask what fate awaits the daughter who has stolen the worship of the goddess of love. The words slithered across the walls, curling into every ear. She will not wed a mortal, nor will she be joined to a god. She is destined for a union darker still, a marriage to a winged horror that neither man nor immortal dares name. Upon a lonely cliff must she be laid, dressed as a bride yet offered as prey, and there the creature will claim her. The queen fell to her knees, her hands clutching her face. The king tried to protest, his voice rising in fury, but the oracle's gaze never wavered. The gods have spoken, she said, and no crown can change their will. Psyche listened in silence, her heart pounding like iron struck on an anvil. She had dreamed of love, of laughter, of children playing in sunlit courtyards. But now her fate had been carved in stone. Her beauty, once her blessing, had become her sentence, and the whisper of the gods had turned into a verdict that could not be undone. Outside the temple, thunder rolled, though no storm had touched the sky. The day of her sacrifice came dressed in silence. No musicians played, no laughter echoed in the streets, only the sound of footsteps dragging across stone. Psyche wore a bridal gown that shimmered like snow in moonlight, though it was not chosen for love. Her father walked beside her, his crown tilted as if the weight of it had become unbearable, his hand trembling as he tried to hold hers steady. Her mother's tears left streaks across her cheeks, prayers falling from her lips, even though she knew no goddess would listen. Citizens gathered along the road, their faces pale with awe and pity, whispering her name as though it were already carved on a tomb. The cliff awaited her, a place where the world seemed to end in sky and shadow. The wind tore at her gown, lifting the fabric like wings that were not her own. The priest declared her fate aloud, a marriage not to man nor God, but to the unseen terror promised by the oracle. The king tried once more to resist, his voice cracking with rage, but the queen laid her hand upon his arm and whispered that the will of Olympus could not be broken. With trembling steps they left her there, a lone figure upon the rock, her veil fluttering like a signal to whatever creature waited in the depths. Fear wrapped itself around Psyche's heart like iron chains, each breath sharp as she stared at the endless sky. She closed her eyes, waiting for the talons, the teeth the horror promised. Instead, she felt a shift in the air, gentle and strange, like a sigh moving across the valley. The wind grew warm, carrying with it the scent of flowers and hidden rivers. It lifted her softly, not like prey dragged away, but like a bride carried to her chamber. Her feet left the stone, and for the first time since the oracle's sentence, she did not feel abandoned. She felt held. The voice of the wind whispered without words, telling her not to fear. She opened her eyes and saw no monster, only the rolling clouds beneath her, painted in colours of twilight, violet and gold. The city shrank away behind her, the cliff fading into memory, until there was only the vastness of air and the soft embrace that carried her onward. Her gown trailed like a banner through the sky, and though her heart still trembled, she began to sense that not all the gods wished her broken. Zephyrus, the west wind, bore her across mountains and rivers, lowering her gently into a valley hidden from mortal eyes. The place was strange yet beautiful, filled with trees whose leaves shimmered as if touched by starlight, flowers that glowed faintly in the dusk, and waters that sang when they moved. The air itself seemed alive, watching her, welcoming her. Psyche stood upon the grass, her veil falling softly at her feet, and for the first time in many days she breathed without sorrow. She was not devoured, not chained, not destroyed. Instead, she was cradled by gentleness, and the terror that had haunted her steps began to loosen, replaced by a mystery she did not yet understand. The valley opened into something beyond mortal craft, a palace that shimmered like it had been carved from moonlight itself. Its walls glowed faintly, not with torches or fire, but with a living light that seemed to breathe. Psyche stepped cautiously across floors so smooth they mirrored her image, yet no footsteps echoed back to her. The silence was heavy until a voice, soft and distant, rose from nowhere. "Welcome, lady." The words came not from a mouth, but from the air itself, as if the wind had learned language. She froze, her hands trembling, but the voice continued with calm assurance. "This is your home now." She was guided without being touched. Doors swung open before she reached them, curtains stirred, though no hand brushed them, and in the grand hall a table appeared, covered in fruits that gleamed like jewels and goblets filled with sweet wine that steamed faintly in the air. She hesitated, but hunger gnawed at her, and when she tasted the food, it melted like sunlight on her tongue. The same invisible voices sang as she ate, a chorus rising in harmony, their melodies weaving comfort where fear had taken root. At night, the palace transformed. Lanterns flickered to life, though no fire burned within them, casting golden light across marble pillars that seemed older than time itself. Music drifted through the halls, the sound of harps and flutes, though she could see no players. The melodies wrapped around her like warm cloth, softening her thoughts, drawing her deeper into wonder. She wandered from chamber to chamber, each one stranger and more beautiful than the last, until at last she stood in a room prepared like a bridal chamber, its bed covered in silks that shimmered like water at dawn. It was there that the voices grew quieter, replaced by something else, the hush of a presence unseen but near. The air shifted, warmer, heavier, as though someone stood at her side, though she could not see him. Her heart raced, yet the presence did not strike, did not threaten. Instead, it spoke in a tone deeper, gentler than the voices that had guided her before. Do not fear, you are safe, I am your husband. She tried to look, to pierce the shadows, but darkness veiled him, as if the night itself obeyed his command. He touched her hand, and though she saw no form, she felt warmth that spread through her veins like fire. His words lingered in her ear, carrying both comfort and warning. Trust is our bond, and trust means no light. You must not seek my face. If you do, you will lose everything. Psyche lay awake long after, staring into the unseen space where he had been. The palace breathed around her, alive with its mysteries. She was clothed, fed, cherished, yet bound by a rule she could not understand. The silence of the palace was no longer heavy, but it was not empty either. It was filled with secrets, and in its depths she felt both wonder and unease, as though love and danger walked hand in hand through every unseen corridor. The nights in the palace did not arrive like ordinary evenings. They fell slowly, as if the stars themselves leaned closer, scattering their light across the silken walls. Psyche would wait in her chamber, her heart thundering, until the air thickened and she knew he was there. He never entered with the weight of footsteps or the creak of doors, only with warmth, as if the night itself had grown alive. His voice always came first, gentle and low, a sound that brushed against her like a song remembered from childhood. Do not fear, he would whisper, I am yours, and you are mine. In his presence, her fear dissolved like frost before morning Sunday. Though she could not see him, he treated her with tenderness. He held her hands, and where his fingers touched, her pulse steadied. He spoke of things she did not know, of rivers that whispered to the stars, of winds that carried messages across mountains, of places where no mortal had ever stepped. His words painted worlds she could not imagine, and she felt herself drift within them, caught between wonder and longing. Every night he reminded her of one law, a single boundary that bound their love together: trust. She must not bring a lamp into the darkness, must not try to know his face. The warning was simple, yet heavy. Trust me, he said, for if you seek me with light, you will lose me forever. His words trembled with weight, not as a threat, but as a plea. And Psyche, drawn to the warmth of his presence, nodded through her silence, telling herself that trust was enough. Their time together was strange and sweet. He never spoke of himself, but always of her, asking about her dreams, her fears, her memories of the city she had left behind. She found herself speaking more each night, her voice no longer shy. She told him of her childhood, of playing beneath olive trees, of her sister's jealous eyes, of how heavy her beauty had become when the world turned it into a burden she never wanted. He listened without interruption, and she felt heard in a way she never had before. When he laughed, the air shimmered, as if the walls themselves bent to join in his joy. When he fell silent, the room felt alive with a pulse that matched her own. She began to wait for the evenings, counting the hours until night returned. The palace by day was wondrous, filled with light and song, but the palace by night was alive, wrapped in his unseen presence. And yet, even in her contentment, a seed of unease grew. She wondered what face lay beyond the darkness, what eyes watched her, even as she could not see them. The warnings he gave her were clear, yet the human heart longs for more than mystery. Still, for now, she silenced the question and let herself fall into his embrace, trusting the night, trusting the stranger who came with tenderness and vanished with dawn. When word reached Psyche's family that she still lived, her sisters burned with curiosity and envy. They had watched her carried away to what they believed was certain death, yet now rumours whispered that she dwelled in luxury, untouched, unseen, and adored by a husband none had met. So they came, invited by the wind itself, and Zephyrus bore them into the hidden valley where Psyche waited, her heart torn between joy and unease. She had missed them, longed for familiar voices, yet she feared what truths they might drag with them from the world beyond her palace. The sisters gazed upon the luminous halls, the golden fruit, the walls that glowed without flame. Their eyes widened with greed disguised as admiration, their hands brushing every surface as though to test its reality. They pressed Psyche with questions, their words sharp and sweet at once. Who built this? Who rules it? Who is your husband? Psyche smiled, trying to answer without revealing what she did not know. She told them only that her husband was kind, that he loved her, that she was safe. But the sisters exchanged glances that glimmered like knives. They reminded her of the oracle's words, that she had been promised to a monster, a winged horror. How then, they asked, could she trust a man who never showed his face? How could she believe in love that hid in shadows? What if his kindness was only a mask, his words a trick to lull her before the truth revealed itself? They whispered that the palace was not a gift but a prison, that her unseen husband was waiting for the moment when her belly grew heavy with a child, so he could devour both mother and offspring. Their voices pressed against her like thorns, sowing seeds of fear where once she had planted trust. Psyche tried to defend him, recalling the warmth of his touch, the laughter that filled the chamber, the gentleness of his presence. But her sister's words clung to her heart, drawing out the doubt she had buried. Was it not strange that he forbade her to look upon him? Was it not dangerous to love what she could not see? The more they spoke, the more their voices drowned out her memories of tenderness, replacing them with visions of scales, fangs, and wings spread wide in the darkness. When they departed, their farewells were laced with false sweetness. They kissed her cheeks and promised to pray for her, but their eyes glittered with triumph. As Zephyrus carried them away, Psyche stood in silence, her chest heavy, her thoughts twisted into knots. The palace that once felt alive with wonder now seemed to watch her too closely. The shadows in the corners grew darker. The voice at night, once her comfort, began to sound like a riddle. She lay awake, replaying her sister's warnings, her hand trembling as she reached for the lamp she had promised never to light. The seed of doubt had been planted, and even in the warmth of her husband's embrace, it began to grow. The night her doubt finally won was a night heavy with silence. Psyche lay in her chamber, the voice of her sisters whispering in her memory, louder than the songs of the palace or the laughter of her unseen husband. "Trust," he had said, "only trust." But trust is fragile when shadow hides the truth. Her hand rested against the lamp beside her bed, its bronze surface cool, its oil full, waiting. She told herself she would not use it, that she would hold to her promise, but the thought gnawed at her until she could no longer close her eyes. What if the voices were right? What if she slept beside a monster every night and mistook kindness for disguise? She waited until his breathing deepened, steady and warm beside her. Carefully, with hands that shook like leaves in a storm, she rose from the bed and took the lamp in her grasp. She lifted it slowly, whispering apologies in her heart, telling herself that once she saw the truth, her fear would end. The flame flickered to life, casting a golden glow across the bed. What she saw struck her silent. There was no serpent, no beast, no winged horror waiting to devour her. Instead, the light revealed a man so radiant that her breath caught in her throat. His skin shimmered faintly like marble lit from within. His hair shone like woven sunlight, and at his back rested wings folded in quiet grace. His face was serene, beautiful, beyond any mortal's. His lips curved in gentle sleep. This was no monster. This was Eros, the god of desire, son of Aphrodite, the one who had come to her in shadow not as a curse but as a lover. Her heart surged with awe and guilt all at once. She leaned closer, desperate to memorize every line of him, every curve of light along his form, as if sight could stitch back the trust she had broken. Her hand trembled, and that was when it happened. A single drop of oil slipped from the lip of the lamp, falling like molten fire. It struck his shoulder and sizzled against his skin. Eros woke with a cry, his eyes snapping open, not with fury but with pain. He saw the lamp in her hands, the flame burning where trust had died. His face, once tender, now twisted with sorrow deeper than any wound. Psyche dropped the lamp, tears already rising in her eyes. "Please," she whispered, "forgive me." But he shook his head slowly, his wings unfurling in the golden light. "I warned you," he said, his voice breaking. "Love cannot live where trust is broken." He rose from the bed, his form shining brighter now, too bright for her eyes to follow. With a rush of air and feathers, he vanished into the night sky, leaving Psyche alone in the silence of a palace that had once been filled with warmth. The lamp still smoked in her hands, and though her tears fell like rain, nothing could undo the drop of oil that had woken a god in pain. The night of his leaving did not end with silence, it ended with wings. Eros fled into the darkness, feathers scattering like sparks across the chamber, each one glowing faintly before falling to the marble floor. Psyche chased after him, her bare feet striking against the stone, her voice breaking as she cried his name, but the god was already gone, vanishing into the clouds where mortals could not follow. The palace that once seemed alive now groaned, as if it had been wounded too. The music stopped, the glowing walls dimmed, the unseen voices fell into silence. By the time dawn touched the horizon, the palace was unraveling, its beauty fading into dust. Psyche stumbled through the halls as they dissolved around her. Curtains that once shimmered with starlight turned to ash in her hands. Tables laden with food melted into nothing. The great pillars cracked and crumbled until only shadow remained. She cried out again, calling for the voices who had served her, but none answered. The palace was no longer a sanctuary, it was a grave for the trust she had broken. At last, she found herself standing in the courtyard, the air still heavy with the scent of burnt oil. The sky was pale, streaked with the first light of morning, but it brought no warmth. In the silence, she saw it, lying upon the grass, a single feather, white as snow, with a faint shimmer that pulsed like a heartbeat. She picked it up carefully, clutching it to her chest as though it could hold him close, though she knew it was only a fragment, a reminder of what she had lost. She wept there until the ground beneath her grew cold. Every moment replayed in her mind, the nights of tenderness, the warnings she had ignored, the beauty she had ruined with doubt. The feather in her hand was soft, yet it cut deeper than any blade. She whispered his name again, but the valley that once breathed with life was now empty. Even the wind that had once carried her gently into this place refused to stir, as if it too had abandoned her. When the sun finally rose, it did not fall upon marble or gardens, only upon grass and stone. The palace had vanished, as though it had never been, leaving Psyche alone upon the hillside. She clung to the feather, the last proof that her husband had been real, that she had not dreamed the warmth of his presence. Yet even as she held it, it seemed to grow fainter, its shimmer fading with the morning light. The echo of his cry haunted her, not with anger, but with sorrow. It followed her into the silence, whispering of the love she had shattered. She stood there, small against the wide sky, the ruins of her trust scattered around her like ash. And though she did not know it yet, this was not the end of her story, but the beginning of a path far darker and heavier, a path that would lead her into the hands of a goddess who smiled with cruelty. Psyche wiped her tears, but the feather in her hand reminded her with every beat of her heart that she had lost the god who loved her. Psyche wandered the world with ash in her heart and a feather clutched close to her chest, searching for a way to mend what she had broken. She climbed mountains, crossed rivers, and whispered to temples that had long since grown silent, but no god answered her. Each night she begged the stars for Eros to return, and each morning she woke with only silence. At last, with her strength failing and her spirit trembling, she turned her steps toward the one whose anger burned brightest, the mother of the god she had betrayed, Aphrodite. The goddess of love did not dwell in shadows or hidden valleys. Her halls blazed with gold, her floors mirrored the faces of those who dared to look down, and her scent of roses filled the air like a perfume too sweet to endure. Psyche entered barefoot, humbled, her gown torn by her journey. She bowed low before the throne where Aphrodite sat, radiant as the dawn yet colder than ice. The goddess did not rise to greet her, only looked down with eyes that glittered like sharpened gems. "So you are the mortal who thought herself worthy of my son. Her voice was soft, almost musical, but it carried a cruelty that made Psyche tremble. You were given kindness, a palace no mortal could dream of, a god's love, and still you destroyed it with your doubt. Tell me, why should you not be punished? Psyche fell to her knees, pressing her forehead to the floor. Forgive me, great goddess, she whispered. I ask only for a chance to prove my love, to earn him back, no matter the cost. Aphrodite's lips curved into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. Mercy, she said slowly, is not given. It is earned, and it is paid in blood and sweat. You wish to prove yourself? Then you shall serve me. I will weave for you a net of thorns, each task a knot that will cut your hands and pierce your heart. Fail even once, and you will not see Eros again. With a wave of her hand, the goddess summoned visions into the air, images of impossible labours waiting for Psyche. A mountain of seeds, more numerous than the stars. Golden rams foaming with rage along a riverbank. Water drawn from the mouth of Styx, guarded by death itself. And a journey into the underworld, where mortals returned only as shadows. Each vision burned into Psyche's mind, heavy and cruel, yet she did not look away. Very well, she said, her voice thin but steady. I will do what you command. Aphrodite leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. You will find no helpers here, mortal. Love has abandoned you, the gods scorn you, and every step you take will be under my gaze. When you fail, the world will remember not your beauty, but your ruin. Still, Psyche bowed her head, her heart pounding. She had faced silence, she had faced loss, and now she would face thorns. For even if the tasks broke her, she would rather shatter in the attempt than live forever without him. Aphrodite leaned back against her throne, her smile thin and sharp. Let us see how long your love can bleed. Aphrodite wasted no time. The goddess led Psyche to a great hall where the floor was buried beneath a mountain of seeds. They spilled in every direction, tiny and countless. A flood of grain mixed so chaotically that even the stars above would envy their number. Barley tangled with wheat, lentils with millet, poppy with corn, each so small that to touch one was to lose 10 more in the cracks. Aphrodite's laughter rang through the chamber as she gestured to the endless pile. By the time the moon rises, she said, every seed must be sorted into its own kind. If even one is out of place, you will fail. She vanished in a shimmer of perfume and roses, leaving Psyche alone before the impossible. The weight of despair crushed her shoulders. She fell to her knees, digging her fingers into the seeds. They poured through her hands like sand, mocking her. The mountain seemed to grow taller the more she tried, and already the light outside shifted toward dusk. Her heart sank. It was not labour, it was cruelty disguised as a task. Even if she worked without breath or sleep, she would never finish. Tears blurred her eyes, dripping into the seeds that glittered faintly in the dim light like scattered stars. She whispered to herself that perhaps this was what Aphrodite wanted, not proof of love, but proof of futility. As she wept, something stirred at her feet. At first she thought it was the seeds shifting, but then she felt the tickle of tiny legs. She looked closer and saw them, a line of ants crawling across the floor. They moved with purpose, weaving around her fingers, vanishing into the mountain of seeds. More followed, then more, until they formed a living river, flowing black and endless. The ants did not hesitate. They separated the seeds with precision. Barley placed here, millet carried there, poppy gathered into tiny clusters. Thousands of them moved as if they shared one mind, their bodies glinting faintly in the fading light. Psyche stared in awe, her tears drying as she realized she was not alone. She whispered her gratitude, her voice trembling, and though the ants made no reply, their work grew faster, tireless, and exact. Hours passed, the sky beyond the windows darkening to violet. The moon began to rise, its silver light spilling across the chamber. Psyche looked upon the floor and gasped. Where once there had been chaos, now there were perfect rows, every seed separated, glimmering like constellations across the hall. It was as though the ants had woven the sky itself upon the ground. When Aphrodite returned, her smile faltered. She looked upon the ordered seeds, flawless and complete, and for the first time her eyes narrowed with suspicion. But Psyche stood tall, weary yet unbroken, her hands still trembling from where she had tried to help. The goddess said nothing, only flicked her hand, and the seeds vanished into nothing. She turned away, her voice sharp as she declared there would be another task tomorrow. Psyche pressed her hand to her chest, whispering thanks to the unseen helpers who had answered her despair. For though the mountain had been impossible, love had found her in the smallest of allies, and the stars upon the floor had proven that she was not entirely forsaken. Aphrodite did not give Psyche time to rest. At dawn the goddess appeared again, her smile sharp and her voice dripping with false sweetness. "If you wish to prove your love," she said, "then bring me fleece spun from the golden rams that graze by the bellowing river." She waved her hand, and in an instant Psyche found herself upon a barren plain where the air shimmered with heat and the roar of rushing water filled the sky. The river was wide and violent, crashing against its banks with the fury of storms. Along its edge roamed the rams, beasts unlike any Psyche had ever seen. Their wool gleamed like molten sunlight, each strand more precious than gold, but their eyes blazed with madness. They smashed their horns against trees until trunks split like kindling. They pawed the earth, charging at shadows, their roars carrying across the water like thunder. To approach them was to invite death. Psyche's heart quivered at the sight, her body frozen. How could she gather fleece from creatures that killed for the joy of it? She wandered along the bank, searching for courage, but the rams prowled too close. Their horns caught the sun, their rage made the ground tremble. She sank to her knees, pressing her hands to her face. The task was hopeless. Aphrodite had sent her here not to succeed, but to be torn apart. The thought of Eros filled her with despair, for even if her love was pure, how could it endure against monsters bred of fury? Then, from the reeds along the river, a whisper rose, soft and steady. "Do not go to them now." Psyche looked up, startled, but saw no one. Only a reed swayed gently in the breeze, its voice rustling like music. "Wait until the sun falls. When the heat fades, they will rest." The golden fleece catches on the thorns and branches. Gather it then, and you will live. Psyche pressed her palms together in gratitude, whispering thanks to the strange spirit that spoke through the reed. She hid herself in the shadows of the riverbank and waited. The day dragged slowly, each hour burning upon her skin, each roar of the rams rattling her bones. But as the sun sank lower, the air cooled, and the beasts grew weary. Their fury dimmed to restlessness, their heads lowered, their breaths slowed. One by one they lay upon the earth, their golden wool glimmering in the fading light. Psyche rose carefully, her steps light as she followed the reed's guidance. She moved not toward the rams, but toward the branches, where their fleece had snagged during the day. Shreds of gold clung to the thorns, shimmering like stars fallen into the grass. She gathered them gently, her arms filling with radiance that burned but did not wound. By the time the moon rose, she carried enough to dazzle even a goddess. When Aphrodite beheld the fleece, her smile thinned, her eyes narrowing with unspoken anger. Yet Psyche bowed her head, silent but steady, clutching the memory of the reed's whisper. For in that moment she understood something Aphrodite could not take from her. Even in the face of impossible fury, wisdom and patience could triumph where force would fail. And though her hands ached from thorns, they also glowed with the light of golden proof that she would not break so easily. Aphrodite's eyes glittered with malice when Psyche returned with arms full of golden fleece. The goddess clapped her hands lightly, as if mocking a child who had survived a game not meant to be won. "Very well," she said. "Then let us see if you can drink from the veins of death itself." She placed a crystal vial in Psyche's hand, its surface cold as if it already knew what it would hold. "Fill this with water from the Styx. Bring it back before dawn." At once, Psyche was carried to a jagged mountainside, its cliffs black as burnt stone. From high above thundered the Styx, not as a river, but as a torrent that burst from the rocks and fell screaming into the void below. The water was darker than night, icy mist curling from its spray, and its sound was like 1,000 voices groaning together. Legends had whispered that no mortal hand could touch it without being burned into ash, that its currents carried the oaths of gods and the curses of the dead. Psyche looked upon it and felt her knees weaken. To climb those cliffs was madness. To reach the water was death. She pressed her forehead against the stone, clutching the empty vial. Despair clawed at her chest. Aphrodite had given her no task, only a sentence. She whispered Eros's name into the mist, her voice lost in the roar, her heart breaking beneath the weight of another impossible command. Perhaps this was where her journey ended, at the edge of a river that even the gods feared. But then the air shifted, a shadow sweeping across the rock. From the clouds above, an eagle descended, vast and golden, its wings spread wider than the river itself. Its eyes burned like lightning, and Psyche knew it at once, one of the sacred birds of Zeus, the king of heaven. Its talons dug into the stone beside her, and when it spoke, its voice cracked like thunder. "Foolish child," it said, "no mortal may drink from the Styx. Even the gods tread lightly here. But Zeus has heard your cries, and for the sake of the love you carry, I will help you." The eagle seized the vial gently in its claws and rose into the storm. Psyche watched as it soared higher and higher, its wings beating against the furious spray. The water hissed and screamed, lashing out like living chains, but the eagle did not falter. It plunged into the mist, its feathers catching droplets that burned like fire, and with unshaken strength it filled the vial. When it returned, the vessel trembled in its grip, black water sloshing inside, colder than ice and heavier than stone. It placed the vial in Psyche's hands, and for a moment their eyes met. "Do not forget," the eagle rumbled, "that even in the cruelest tasks, not all the heavens are your enemy." Then it beat its wings and vanished into the storm, leaving Psyche clutching the vessel that seemed to hum with power too vast for mortals. When she returned to Aphrodite, the goddess's lips curved in another smile, though her eyes were darker now. Psyche lowered her gaze, her hands still cold from holding the sticks, and thought of the eagle's strength. She knew her trials were not yet over, but for the first time she felt that her love had carried her voice even to the throne of Zeus, and the heavens had answered. Aphrodite's smile was sharper than any blade when Psyche placed the vial of Styx water at her feet. The goddess leaned forward on her throne, her voice dripping with delight at the cruelty she was about to deliver. "One last task," she said, "and, if you succeed, perhaps I will believe your love has worth. Go to the underworld, find Persephone, queen of the dead, and ask her for a portion of her beauty. She keeps it sealed within a box. Bring it back to me, untouched. Do not open it, for it is not yours to hold." The words struck Psyche like cold iron. To descend into the land of shadows was to step where no mortal could return. Yet she bowed her head, her voice steady though her heart trembled. "I will go." Aphrodite laughed, a sound like roses hiding thorns, and dismissed her with a wave. Psyche walked alone into the wilderness, seeking the place where earth's skin thins and the underworld breathes through cracks of stone. The path was lined with silence heavier than any mountain, the kind that listens rather than lingers. She reached a cave where the wind refused to blow, and the air smelled of forgotten prayers. She knew then that this was the gate. Her hands shook as she clutched a few coins and barley cakes, offerings she had been told were needed to appease the dead. She whispered a prayer, not for mercy but for courage, and stepped inside. Darkness swallowed her whole. Shadows pressed against her skin, whispers crawled along the walls, voices of the countless souls who had walked this road and never returned. They begged for food, for drink, for the warmth of the living. Psyche offered the cakes to those who blocked her path, coins to the ferryman whose eyes burned like dying embers. Charon took her across the black waters, his boat groaning, as if burdened not by her weight but by her defiance. On the other side she passed through fields of ash, past shades who drifted like smoke, until at last she stood before a throne carved from obsidian. There sat Persephone, her skin pale as moonlight, her eyes deep as winter. Flowers grew in her lap, their petals black yet glimmering faintly, blooming from the soil of the dead. When she spoke, her voice carried the patience of centuries. "Mortal child, why do you walk among shadows?" Psyche fell to her knees, her voice breaking. "Great queen, Aphrodite commands me to beg a portion of your beauty, that I may return with it sealed in a box." Persephone studied her for a long moment, then nodded as though she had already known the request would come. She lifted a small casket carved of bone and jet, its surface glowing faintly with something too heavy to name. "Be warned," Persephone said. "What lies within is not for mortal eyes. Carry it faithfully, and it will not harm you." She placed the box into Psyche's hands, its weight far greater than its size, as if all the world's silence had been poured inside. Psyche bowed her head, whispering gratitude, and turned back toward the path that would lead her once more into the light. Yet, as she walked, the box throbbed faintly against her palms, a reminder that though her task was nearly complete, temptation was never far behind. The underworld did not welcome Psyche, it endured her. Each step she took was swallowed by silence deeper than oceans, silence that pressed against her skin and slowed her breath. The path wound downward, carved into stone blacker than midnight, and every turn brought faces half-formed in the walls, shades who reached with trembling hands but never touched. Their voices were faint as wind through dead leaves, begging for warmth, for food, for memory. She clutched the barley cakes she had carried and gave them when the shades blocked her way. Each offering was taken with eyes that flickered briefly, a spark of thanks before fading back into emptiness. Deeper she went until she reached the judges. They sat upon thrones of rock, their faces carved with lines of eternity, their eyes weighing her without mercy. Before them, souls stood trembling, confessing, pleading, bound by the choices they had made in life. When Psyche stepped forward, the judges did not ask her name or her sins. They only stared, silent, until the eldest raised his hand and pointed. The gesture was not permission but recognition, as though they knew her journey was not theirs to stop. She bowed her head and passed, her heart pounding with the weight of unseen eyes. The air grew colder. Rivers cut through the dark, their waters sluggish and thick, their surface reflecting not the stars but only shadows. At the bank stood Charon, the ferryman, his cloak dripping with mist, his gaze sharp as knives. He extended his hand, palm open, and Psyche placed a coin upon it. His fingers closed around the offering, and without a word he guided her onto the boat. The vessel groaned as it slid across the black current, the water whispering secrets that clung to her ears but made no sense. She kept her eyes on the far bank, refusing to look down lest the river's voices drag her mind into their depths. On the other side, the path narrowed, winding between caverns where despair itself seemed to live. Shapes without form stirred in the shadows, sorrow given body, grief given voice. They whispered her failures, her doubts. The oil spilled upon Eros's shoulder, the palace turned to ash. Each step was heavier, as though her sins were stones tied to her ankles. She nearly faltered, nearly let the weight drag her down, but then she clutched the small box to her chest and whispered Eros's name. The sound cut through the whispers, and the shadows recoiled, hissing like smoke meeting fire. Even despair knows when to step aside. Psyche pressed forward, her breath ragged, her limbs trembling, but her purpose steady. She had not come to dwell among the dead. She had come to return to the world of light with a gift no mortal should carry. The path lifted, the air thinned, and the shadows fell silent. At last she saw the faintest shimmer of daylight ahead, a crack in the stone where life waited. With coins spent, cakes given, and silence endured, Psyche rose from the steps beneath the world, carrying with her not only the box of Persephone, but the proof that even the underworld itself could not hold her from love. The first breath of sunlight felt like a miracle. Psyche stumbled from the cave, her skin pale, her gown torn, her eyes heavy with shadows from the underworld. She pressed the small box to her chest, the gift of Persephone, sealed tight with warnings not to open it. The earth was warm beneath her feet, the air alive with birdsong, but she did not feel lighter. Instead, she felt heavier, as though every step forward pulled her closer to the ground. The box was small, no bigger than her two hands, yet it carried a weight that pressed into her bones. She walked through meadows where flowers bent toward her, their colours bright after the blackness below. Yet when she touched her face, she felt the tiredness etched deep into her skin. Her cheeks were hollow, her eyes rimmed with grief. She remembered Aphrodite's beauty, radiant and eternal, untouched by sorrow. She thought of Eros, his golden skin, his godlike presence, his eyes that had once glowed in the dark as he whispered love to her. And then she thought of herself, weary and worn, a mortal who had walked through death. What lover, she whispered, wants a face carved by sorrow? Her voice trembled in the open air. She held the box in her hands, feeling its throb, faint but steady, as if something inside was alive. Persephone had told her not to open it. Aphrodite had demanded it be sealed. Yet the thought dug into her like a thorn. If it contained beauty, even a draught of it, could it not restore her? Could it not wipe away the proof of suffering from her face? Make her radiant again in Eros's eyes? Her steps slowed, the meadow spinning with golden light. Curiosity clawed at her, louder than hunger, sharper than thirst. She sat upon the grass, her fingers trembling as she traced the carvings on the lid. For a long time she fought herself, whispering that she must endure, that her love was enough. But the box whispered louder. It promised to erase the cracks, to give her back the glow she feared she had lost. At last she lifted the lid. The seal cracked with a sound like stone breaking, and darkness poured out, swift and merciless. It was not beauty that spilled from the box, but sleep, thick and heavy as night. It wrapped around her, pulled her down with hands stronger than chains. Psyche gasped, reaching for the sunlight, but the meadow blurred, her body sinking into the grass. The box tumbled from her hands, its lid fallen open, shadows curling like smoke from its mouth. Her limbs grew heavy, her breath shallow. She tried to whisper Eros's name, but her lips barely moved. The world dimmed, colours fading to ash, until only silence remained. She had opened what was forbidden, and the weight of it had taken her whole. Psyche lay motionless, the meadow quiet, the box beside her, still breathing with the power of the underworld. What she had thought would restore her had instead undone her, and her fate now rested on whether love itself could find her again. The moment the box opened, night itself seemed to escape. It was not the soft velvet of stars, nor the quiet comfort of sleep, but a heavy tide that rolled from the casket and wrapped itself around Psyche like chains of fog. She tried to rise, to fight the weight pressing down on her chest, but her limbs turned to stone beneath her. Her head fell forward, her hair spilling across her face, and the meadow that had moments ago blazed with sunlight dimmed into a twilight no hour had earned. She collapsed beside the road, her body folding into the grass, her hands still clinging to the box, though its lid had fallen open. Her chest rose faintly, a breath now and then, but her eyes were shut, lashes trembling with the burden of what she had unleashed. To any who passed, she would have seemed not dead, but caught in a strange stillness, a statue of flesh carved by exhaustion, her lips parted as though she had been caught mid-whisper. The birds that had sung above fell quiet, perching in uneasy silence, as the strange sleep spread from her body like ripples in a pond. Flowers bent away, their petals folding. Even the air thickened, heavy with the breath of something unnatural. Yet it was not death that had claimed her. Death comes cold, with silence that devours the soul. This was different. This was sleep twisted by the underworld, a spell that clung to her skin and pulled her spirit down into places she could not reach. Her dreams, if they could be called that, were formless. She drifted through shadows, glimpsing shapes that faded when she reached for them, hearing whispers that broke apart before they became words. She saw Eros's face in the dark, his eyes shining like dawn, but whenever she tried to hold him, the vision scattered like smoke. Each time she fell back into silence, deeper and deeper, the world above her vanishing as though she had never been. On the road nearby, the silence of her fall left a mark. Travellers who passed felt the weight in the air and turned away, whispering prayers to gods who would not answer. Some thought her a statue left by forgotten hands, others a cursed maiden punished by divine anger. None dared touch her. She remained there, pale against the grass, the box glimmering faintly beside her like a trap set by the gods themselves. Hours stretched into something slower, the sun circling above, while Psyche's body lay unmoving. Night spilled across the sky, then retreated to dawn, yet still she did not stir. She was alive, her breath faint, but she belonged more to the silence now than to the earth. And so she remained, waiting in that breathless stillness, not knowing that the one she had wounded, the one who had fled her touch, was even now drawing near. For only love itself could pierce this sleep, and only Eros could decide whether to forgive the hand that had betrayed him. The road was silent when the flutter of wings stirred the air. It was not the light rustle of sparrows or the sharp cry of hawks, but something deeper, heavier, a sound that carried both pain and memory. From the sky descended Eros, his golden wings still scarred where the oil had burned him. Time had mended flesh, but not trust, and though he flew once more, every beat of his wings carried the echo of that wound. He landed softly, his sandals pressing into the grass, and his eyes fell upon her. Psyche, she lay like marble carved into the shape of sorrow, her body folded upon itself, her hair tangled in the wind. Her hands still clutched the small box, its lid cracked open, the breath of night still lingering around her like a shroud. For a moment he thought she was gone, that death had stolen her before forgiveness could even be considered. His heart clenched, a storm of anger and longing crashing against his chest. He had told himself he would not return, that her betrayal had ended them, yet here he was, drawn to her as surely as fire is drawn to air. He knelt beside her, his shadow falling across her still face. Her lips were pale, her breath faint but steady. It was not death. It was something else, something crueler, a sleep that chained her spirit in silence. He knew the scent of it. This was Persephone's gift, twisted into punishment. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, and for the first time in many nights, his hand did not tremble. Memory flooded him. Nights when she whispered his name in the dark, mornings when her laughter filled the palace halls, the warmth of her trust before it had been broken. He wanted to turn away, to let her lie where her choices had left her. But love, stubborn and relentless, refused to let go. Even in betrayal, she was the one his heart knew. Even in sleep, she was his. He leaned closer, his breath mingling with hers, his lips brushing her forehead. It was not anger that guided him, nor pity, but the truth that had always bound them, even when everything else had fallen apart. He kissed her gently, and the spell cracked. The heavy night that clung to her dissolved, scattering like chaff before the wind. The meadow brightened, the flowers lifted their heads, and Psyche's lashes fluttered. Her eyes opened slowly, confusion clouding them at first, then recognition. She saw him, the god with the wounded wing, and tears filled her gaze. She tried to speak, but he pressed a finger to her lips, silencing her. Not now. Rest. His voice trembled with both command and tenderness. The box lay forgotten in the grass, its power spent, its curse undone by something stronger than the underworld's silence. Eros gathered her into his arms, his wings folding protectively around them both. For the first time since their love had broken, the world felt whole again, fragile but alive. And though forgiveness was not yet spoken, its seed had been planted with a kiss. The meadow still held the echo of broken night when Psyche stirred fully in Eros's arms. Her breath came sharp at first, then steadier, and her eyes searched his face with both wonder and fear. She whispered his name, her voice fragile as if she feared it might shatter him. Eros looked down at her, his wounded wing folding tight against his back, the scar catching the sunlight like a reminder carved into flesh. His gaze was stern but not cruel. "You never trusted me," he said quietly, and the words were heavier than thunder. His hand brushed her cheek, tender even as it carried rebuke. "I asked for only one thing, that you believe without seeing, that you love without proof, and instead you raised a lamp, and the flame betrayed us both." Psyche lowered her eyes, shame washing over her like cold water. Tears welled in her lashes as she clutched at his arm. "I was afraid," she whispered. "My sisters poisoned my mind. They told me you were a monster, that I would be destroyed. I wanted to know the truth, but in trying to hold it, I lost you." Eros sighed, his expression softening though his voice still carried sorrow. Fear is easy, trust is harder, and love cannot live without it. Yet as he looked at her, weary from her trials, Scarred by labours no mortal should endure, he felt the embers of something stronger than betrayal. She had faced impossible tasks, braved the underworld itself, all for a chance to be beside him again. Her failure had been born of doubt, but her endurance was born of love. He gathered her closer and unfurled his wings. The air stirred, the grass bent low, and with a powerful sweep they rose into the sky. Psyche clung to him, her tears scattering into the wind like rain, but in her chest a fragile warmth sparked. They soared higher, leaving behind the meadow, the cursed box, the silence of her fall. The clouds opened around them, white and endless, the sun blazing like fire reborn. As they flew, Eros spoke again, his tone gentler now, though still edged with warning. Love is not a gift freely given, it is fire. It warms, it lights, but it burns when you hold it carelessly. You know the cost now, Psyche. You know what truth demands. She nodded against his chest, her voice breaking as she swore, I will never doubt again. Whatever trial comes, whatever shadow rises, I will trust you. Eros looked at her, his eyes searching, and for the first time since the lamp's flame had spilled its oil, he allowed himself to believe her. The wind rushed around them, his wings beating strong though still scarred. Feather and fire moved together, love not whole but alive, singed yet unbroken. The sky carried them, the world far below, and though the pain of the past lingered, its grip was loosening. For in this flight they both understood, truth had a price, and they had paid it. Yet love, though fragile, had not died. It had been remade. The clouds grew darker as Eros carried Psyche higher and higher, until the winds began to shiver with thunder. He had not told her where they were going, but she knew by the weight in his eyes that it was no longer her trial but his. When they reached the realm where lightning slept coiled in the heavens, he set her gently upon a cloud and told her to wait. His wings beat once, twice, and he rose alone toward the throne of the Father of Gods. Zeus's hall was no palace of stone, but a storm made permanent. Thunderheads twisted into pillars, lightning curled into crowns, and the air itself trembled beneath the weight of his presence. Eros stood before him, smaller than a shadow cast by the storm, but he did not bow. His voice was steady, though his heart pounded with the force of the sky itself. Father, I come not as a child of Olympus, but as love itself. Zeus leaned upon his scepter, his gaze sharp as a spear. His words rolled like distant thunder. You come for the mortal. Aphrodite rages. The heavens murmur. The balance trembles. Why should I defy the goddess of love for a girl who could not keep trust with her own heart? Eros lifted his chin, his wings unfurling despite their scars. Because love is not meant to be perfect, he answered. It is not carved from marble, untouchable, without flaw. It is trial and fire, doubt and forgiveness. Without struggle, it is shallow, like a garden with no roots, blooming only until the first storm tears it apart. What Psyche and I have endured is not weakness. It is proof. The storm around them stirred, lightning branching like veins across the sky. Zeus's expression did not soften, but neither did it harden. You dare lecture me on proof, boy? I, who have seen empires rise and burn. I, who have watched mortals swear love by morning and betray it by night. Love is a spark, bright and fleeting. Why should I give it eternity? Eros stepped forward, the storm breaking across his shoulders, but his voice held firm, because without love, eternity is hollow. Without it, the thrones of gods are only stone, the victories of men only ashes. My mother sees love as beauty to be worshipped, as conquest to be won. But I tell you, it is more than that. It is endurance. It is choosing each other even when everything else has fallen away. For the first time, Zeus was silent. He leaned back, the storm quieting to a hum, as though even the thunder waited. His eyes narrowed, considering, weighing the boy who dared to speak against the will of his mother, against the fears of Olympus itself. At last he rumbled, Perhaps there is strength in what you say, but strength alone does not command my favor. The storm flickered brighter, testing. Convince me, Eros, not with words, but with what you are willing to give. Eros stood in the heart of thunder, his face unflinching, and answered without hesitation, anything. For Psyche, anything. The storm surged, and Zeus's gaze deepened, for the trial of the gods had only just begun. Zeus studied Eros for a long moment, the storm flickering in his eyes. The god of thunder had heard countless pleas from mortals and immortals alike, all begging for favors, all offering hollow promises. But this was different. The boy did not ask for victory or glory. He asked for a mortal, for love. The silence stretched until the very air seemed to hold its breath. At last, Zeus lifted his hand, and the storm obeyed. The lightning dimmed, the thunder softened, and in that stillness he spoke. Very well. If love has survived the fires you claim, then let it be tested no longer. Bring her to me. Eros's wings carried him swiftly downward. Psyche stood waiting where he had left her, fear in her eyes, but no hesitation in her step as he took her hand. Together they rose once more into the storm hall, and Psyche's knees bent beneath the weight of Zeus's gaze. She bowed her head low, feeling smaller than a single grain of sand beneath an endless ocean. Her mortal bones trembled, but she did not look away. Zeus regarded her with the same patience he gave the stars. Mortal child, he said, your beauty stirred the wrath of Aphrodite, your doubt broke the trust of Eros, and yet you endured labors no mortal should survive. Tell me, why should you walk among gods? Psyche's voice shook, but her words held steady, not for power, not for glory, not for worship, only for him. She turned her eyes to Eros, and in them was no pleading, only truth. I would rather suffer every trial again than live one day without him. Zeus leaned back, the air thick with the weight of judgment. Then rise, Psyche, for no mortal may stand forever beside a god unless she too sheds the chains of earth. He lifted a goblet wrought from lightning itself, its surface alive with sparks, filled with the drink of immortality, ambrosia. Its scent filled the air like blossoms from a garden that had never known death. Eros guided Psyche forward, his hand steady at her back. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the goblet, the metal humming against her skin. She raised it to her lips, and the first sip was fire, the second was light, the third was eternity. The drink slid through her veins, burning, searing, not with pain but with awakening. Her skin glowed faintly, her breath deepened, and her heart, once bound by the fragile rhythm of mortality, now pulsed with starlight. She gasped as the change overtook her body weightless, her sorrow peeling away like an old skin. Her tears dried, her strength surged, and her eyes widened as they caught the reflection of eternity in their depths. She was no longer just a girl who had wandered the earth in search of love. She was more. She was immortal. Zeus watched, his face unreadable, then thundered, "So it is done. Let none speak against this union, for it has been witnessed by Olympus itself." Psyche lowered the goblet, her hand still glowing faintly, and turned to Eros. He gathered her close, his wings encircling her, and in that embrace the storm seemed to soften. Love had been tested, and at last it had been crowned not by fate, but by choice. The day of their wedding was not marked by bells or mortal song. It was marked by the sky itself, the winds rising in harmony until the air became a choir. Clouds parted into arches of silver, the sun spilling gold across Olympus, and the halls of the gods shone brighter than polished marble. Psyche stood beside Eros, no longer trembling as a mortal girl, but glowing with the quiet strength of one who had walked through death and returned. Her gown shimmered like dawn breaking over calm waters, and his wings unfurled behind him, scarred yet radiant, each feather a vow that had endured trial. The gods gathered in a circle that stretched beyond sight. Hera, queen of heaven, watched with sharp eyes, her face grave but composed. There was no jealousy in her, only the weight of judgment, as though she measured Psyche's worth with every breath she took. Beside her stood Athena, her spear resting against her shoulder, her gaze cool but thoughtful. In her eyes lay respect, not easily given, for she knew endurance when she saw it. Hermes flitted at the edges of the crowd, his cloak flashing like the winged sandals at his feet, his grin quick and bright, as though even the heavens were not solemn enough to contain his delight. And then she came. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, entered not with fury, but with poise, her beauty sharp as the edge of a blade. Her smile curved like silk hiding steel, a smile that carried no warmth, only elegance. All eyes turned to her, for it was her wrath that had begun this story, and her presence now was its final test. She walked forward slowly, her gown trailing like waves, and stopped before the couple. For a long moment, silence ruled. Even the winds hushed, waiting. Aphrodite's eyes lingered on Psyche, and though her smile did not fade, it tightened. "You have caused me no small grief, mortal turned immortal. You stole the hearts of crowds, drew my son into fire, and even now you stand before me clothed in the favour of Zeus himself." Her words rippled through the hall, sharp as glass. Then she tilted her head, the smile loosening, her voice softening into something dangerous. "But perhaps even I must admit that love is stronger when it has bled." The words cut deep, yet when she stepped aside, the blade was sheathed. Her gesture was not kindness but concession, a recognition that the will of Olympus had spoken, and even she could not overturn it. Eros's hand tightened around Psyche's, steady and proud, as if to remind her that even beneath his mother's gaze they would not falter. The ceremony unfolded, with no mortal priest, no mortal song. The winds themselves carried the vows, their voices weaving between the pillars, lifting words into the sky where no storm could erase them. When Psyche and Eros spoke their promises, the air itself trembled as though Olympus leaned close to listen. Their hands joined, and with that single clasp, the divide between mortal and God vanished. When the vows were sealed, the heavens erupted in brilliance. The stars shimmered, though it was still day. Ambrosia spilled like rivers of honey, and the gods raised their voices in thunderous acclaim. Psyche stood crowned not with jewels, but with the fire of endurance, and Eros stood beside her, no longer the hidden lover of the night, but her husband before all of Olympus. Their wedding was not peace, but triumph, and the winds, the eternal choir, sang until the very edges of the world carried their song. The storm of judgment had passed, and the feast of Olympus swelled like the sea at high tide. Ambrosia flowed, torches burned with light that never dimmed, and the halls of the gods echoed with music woven from voices and strings. Yet beneath the celebration, one gaze still carried weight heavier than all the laughter. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, sat upon her throne, her beauty sharper than diamonds, her smile polished but unreadable. The pride she bore had been wounded, her temples once emptied for the sake of Psyche's mortal face, her worship stolen by the whispers of crowds who adored what she had not granted. For years that insult had burned like fire, and her revenge had been cruel and relentless. Yet now here she was, forced to witness Psyche crowned immortal, joined to her son in a union that even Zeus had blessed. Pride did not vanish easily, but Olympus knew how to soothe a wound when honor was at stake. The spectacle itself was crafted with care. Priests descended back to the earth to reopen Aphrodite's temples, sweeping altars clean of dust and setting roses to burn upon her fires. Festivals that had long fallen silent were rekindled, cities ringing with songs, not for Psyche, but for the goddess whose name had first taught mortals what beauty meant. Everywhere that mortals had once turned their eyes toward the mortal maiden, they now turned them back toward the goddess with homage and trembling awe. Even among the gods, her pride was dressed in ceremony. Hera herself lifted a golden chalice in Aphrodite's honor, and the winds carried the sound of hymns sung in her name. Dancers moved like waves across the floor, each step meant to mirror the grace she had always claimed as her own. The hall itself glowed with roses, the petals never wilting, their fragrance filling the air, as if to declare that no one, not even Psyche, could match the eternal bloom of the goddess of love. Aphrodite's eyes lingered on the young bride. For a moment they seemed to harden, sharp and cold, but as the songs rose louder, her expression shifted. Pride is a careful thing. It demands its due, but when it is fed with devotion, it can be sated. Slowly her shoulders eased, her smile deepened into something less like steel. To the eyes of Olympus she seemed appeased, her anger buried beneath the river of worship flowing once again in her direction. For Psyche, it was not triumph, but balance restored. She had never wished to steal altars, never asked to be adored like a goddess. Her beauty had been a curse she had carried since her first days, a flame that blinded more than it warmed. Now, at last, that fire dimmed, replaced not with scorn but with rightful order. Beauty returned to be an altar rather than an idol, something offered to Aphrodite rather than stolen by fate. And so the celebration roared on, not just for the marriage of love and soul, but for the healing of pride that had nearly torn Olympus apart. Aphrodite's smile lingered, and though it was still edged, it was no longer a blade unsheathed. The goddess had been honoured, her place restored, and in that delicate balance, the story could move forward without her wrath devouring it whole. Time passed on Olympus, not as it does for mortals with seasons and years, but with the steady glow of eternity. Yet, even in the halls of immortality, change still came, and from that change, joy was born. Psyche, once a trembling mortal, now moved among the gods with grace, her trials behind her, but their memory carved deep within her soul. Eros, no longer hidden in shadows, walked beside her openly, his wings whole, his heart no longer bound by secrecy. From their union, from their pain and forgiveness, came a gift neither Olympus nor earth had yet known, a child. The day she was born, the sky itself softened. The winds carried laughter instead of storm. The clouds broke into clear light, and flowers opened even upon the mountain's coldest slopes. The gods gathered in quiet awe, for it was not often that a child was born who carried both the blood of eternity and the memory of mortality. She was small, her skin pale as dawn, her eyes glimmering like water in sunlight, and in her every breath there was a sweetness that stilled even the hardest hearts. They named her Voluptas, pleasure. It was not a name of idleness, but of reward, a reminder that joy is not born without trial, that sweetness grows best in soil watered by sorrow and struggle. She cooed in Psyche's arms, her tiny hand curling around her mother's finger, and in that simple gesture, even Hera's stern face softened. Hermes declared that her laughter was brighter than any song he had carried, and Athena observed with grave wisdom that perhaps this child was proof that endurance was never wasted. Even Aphrodite came. The goddess approached not with wrath this time, but with curiosity, her eyes narrowing as she studied the infant who had bound even her grudges into silence. She touched Voluptus's cheek with a finger, and when the child smiled, Aphrodite's lips twitched into the smallest answer. For how could even pride resist the unbroken joy of new life? Among mortals the news spread like wildfire. Priests spoke of the child as a blessing. Poets sang that she was the promise of peace after storms, and mothers whispered her name when cradling their own. Voluptas was not worshipped as her parents were, but she became something different, a symbol. She was the truth that out of pain comes sweetness, out of trial comes peace, and out of brokenness comes something whole. For Psyche, the child was proof that her suffering had not been in vain. She held her close each night, humming softly, remembering every dark step she had taken, every shadow she had faced, and knowing that all of it had led to this moment. For Eros, she was light in its purest form, a love without condition, a flame that required no trust to be kept, only presence. Voluptas, the child of after, grew beneath the gaze of gods and mortals alike. Her name would echo through both worlds as a reminder that even the hardest roads, if walked together, can end in joy. She was not a goddess of power or vengeance or pride. She was a goddess of the simple truth that after trial comes pleasure, after sorrow comes sweetness, and after all the wounds love has endured, something beautiful can still be born. When peace finally settled over Psyche's life, it did not come with silence, but with clarity. No longer hunted by trials, no longer shadowed by doubt, she walked among mortals as one who had tasted both their frailty and the gods' eternity. Her story had spread long before her, whispered in marketplaces, sung in temples, retold by firesides. People came to see her not as the girl who had angered Aphrodite or the bride who had nearly lost her husband, but as a woman who had stumbled through fire and returned holding something whole. They asked her for wisdom, not beauty, and she gave it freely. She stood before crowds beneath the open sky, her child held sometimes in her arms, Eros watching quietly from the edges, and she spoke not as a goddess apart, but as one who remembered the weight of mortal choices. Love, she said, is not sightless nor sighted. It is trusted. Sight may deceive, blindness may frighten, but trust steadies both. Once I thought love demanded proof that I could not hold it unless I saw it with my own eyes. But the lamp I raised burned more than oil. It burned faith, and from its flame I learned the law every heart must face. Her words carried across the fields, sinking into the ears of young lovers and old couples alike. The lamp is not a weapon, she told them, though in my hand it wounded. It is a teacher. It shows that innocence cannot last forever, that every vow spoken in lightness must be tested in shadow. A promise made once in innocence is fragile, but a promise forged again in fire is strong. Love must endure both. She spoke of her mistakes without shame, for shame was not the end of her story. She told of the palace that had vanished, the oil that had fallen, the feather she had clutched as all crumbled to ash. She told of the ants that saved her, the reed that whispered wisdom, the eagle who braved the sticks, the queen who handed her the box, and the sleep that had almost stolen her forever. Each trial, she said, was a thorn, but together they became a crown. Mortals listened with wide eyes, some with tears. They saw in her story not a tale of unreachable gods, but of their own fragile hearts. For they too knew doubt, jealousy, the temptation to open what should remain closed. They too feared that their love was too weak to survive its trials. Psyche's voice was steady as she gave them hope. Love is not made by perfection. It is made by breaking and choosing again. At the end of her words, she would always lift a lamp, not lit, but whole. She held it high so all could see. This, she said, is no curse. It is a reminder. Do not fear its flame, but do not forget its cost. Every heart will face its lamp, and every heart must decide whether to break or to burn and be remade. The people bowed, not in worship but in reverence, for they understood. The law of the lamp was not only hers, it was theirs. And in that truth, Psyche's story ceased to be a myth and became a mirror held up for every soul that dared to love.